Greetings and welcome to episode 19, and we're in Bible 180, 180 episodes between Genesis and Revelation, looking at the greatest story ever told, looking at the storyline that runs through. We're on Genesis 32 and 33, where after Jacob has his 12 sons with 4 different women, and his name is still Jacob. It will be changed to Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. That's how they came to be. Today we're looking at how Jacob and Esau reconcile, okay? Jacob's story in Genesis 32 and 33 is kind of the story about a guy who ran out of places to hide. He's lived with the consequences of his choices, deceiving Esau, fleeing from home, wrestling with his own identity. Now he's returning to the land that God promised him. But between him and the promise, with his whole entourage of sons and wives and camels and donkeys and sheep and pigs, lies the reconciliation with Esau, the brother he betrayed. So Jacob is about to face the moment that he had feared most. And when he was most afraid, most vulnerable, it's then that God meets him. So the story we're going to look at is giving us 3 movements in Jacob's transformation. He wrestles with God, number 1. He comes out of that wrestling with a limp, and then he reconciles with Esau. Each movement tells us ways in which God transforms us. So in Genesis 32, verses 22 to 32, Jacob wrestles with God. Again, he's alone at night. His family has crossed the river, but he doesn't go with them. He stays behind. And as he's staying behind at night, Scripture says a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Jacob doesn't know at first who is the one that he's wrestling with, actually an angel from God, but he does know this: he cannot go forward until he deals with God. So Jacob spent the whole evening wrestling, and that's indicative of his entire life. Remember how he wrestled with Esau in the womb. He wrestled for his birthright. He wrestled Laban for his wages. He wrestled for control, and he wrestled with fear. But now he wrestles with the one who can actually, literally bless him, that is God. Reminds us that as Jacob struggled with God and God met him in that struggle, that God also meets us in the struggle, not when we're on the other side of it, not when everything is done and we're through, but God meets us in the dark, in fear, and oftentimes in uncertainty. And like I said last episode, asks us to trust. It also, as Jacob is wrestling with this angel, with God, also teaches us that transformation often begins with confrontation. God confronts Jacob not to destroy him, but to break the old Jacob, the deceiver, the manipulator, the self-reliant one. God, in a sense, confronts him to leave behind the way he had been behaving. And then God asks Jacob to name himself in this wrestling match that he wrestled. God said, "What is your name?" And Jacob answered, Jacob. The name means heel grabber. God makes it say out loud who he is so that God can declare who he will become. And in that blessing, when God changed his name to Israel, that blessing came with a wound. God touches Jacob's hip and put it out of joint. Jacob would walk differently for the rest of his life. Sometimes when we come through a struggle, we have something physically, mentally, whatever it might be, to remind us of that struggle and to remind us that we can't forget about the time in which God changes us. So Jacob walks with a limp. Jacob rises from that encounter with God and that wrestling with a new name, Israel, which means one who walks with God. That's what the name Israel means. Instead of a schemer, he's now one who walks with God. And so the limp is not punishment, but the limp, after God touched his hip, is a reminder that Jacob is no longer self-sufficient. It reminds Jacob, Israel, that he must rely and lean on God, and that the blessing comes through surrender, not by striving. The blessing comes through surrender. So sometimes when we've been through difficult times, we are marked by God, and in some way that reminds us of our dependence on God. So Jacob can no longer run from Esau, he must face him. Jacob's limp also reminds him that he needs to be humble. Jacob's limp is a visible sign that he is no longer the one who can rely on his own cunning and strength. And it also is a testimony to others. Anyone who saw Jacob walk would now know that this man has been touched by God. Sometimes we carry spiritual limps, scars or memories or weaknesses or reminders of where God met us, not signs of failure, but as signs of strength. Jacob then does finally reunite with Esau in Genesis 33. Jacob approaches Esau limping, bowing, and trembling. He expects anger. He expects revenge. He expects consequences of his past. But as Esau runs toward him, Esau embraces him and weeps, cries. He's so overcome being reconciled with Jacob. If you read through Genesis 33 sometime, you'll see that it's one of the most beautiful stories of reconciliation in the Bible. The reunion teaches us, finally with Jacob and Esau not hating each other anymore, that Jacob initially prayed, God, deliver me from Esau, but God had already been working on Esau's heart. So reconciliation is possible even after deep wounds. Esau had every reason to hate Jacob, and yet hearts can be softened when we think that they might be unreachable. God can soften hearts. Humility opens the door to healing. Jacob bows before Esau 7 times. He's not manipulating, he's repenting. When Peter said, how many times do I have to forgive? When he says that to Jesus, Jesus is not 7, but 70, because Jacob bowed before Esau 7 times. So Jacob's transformation then is complete. He left Canaan as Jacob the deceiver. When he went, he returned as Israel the redeemed. The lessons we learn from the reconciliation, from the wrestling with God and the reconciliation of Jacob and Esau, is that God meets us in our struggles, and God can break through our brokenness. God can, if we rely on God, God can heal relationships that we think are beyond repair. God can say, you know, this transformation that I want to have with you requires honesty, Jacob had to finally admit that I was a schemer, but now I want to be blessed by God, and God renamed him. We can also be transformed and given a new walk in life. So the good news is that the God who wrestles with us is also the God who walks with us, who wants to be with us. God is always working in ways all through the Bible to restore a sinful and fallen humanity who want to rely on our own stuff. We want what we want and we want it now, to bring us back to God. God is working through all of our struggles to bring us back into a relationship with God that's real and personal. That's what we see all over in the Bible, and that's what we see in the story of the reconciliation of Jacob and Esau that comes after a wrestling with God. I look forward to being with you for the next episode 20, and until then, make it a great day. See you again.